All right. Welcome to today's webinar. I've just given kind of people an introduction to how we're getting started, and I really want to dive into understanding really why vocabulary is so important to us and what works in teaching vocabulary. And as a starting point, most of us are kind of big word nerds. We understand these words when we read. We don't struggle too often to find different words. So I thought I'd pull up one of my favorite poems that really illustrates to people how students that are struggling finding vocabulary words might interact with a difficult text. And that is Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. You may be familiar with it. I've just kind of came across it and have been really playing with it in here. And we're just going to look at the first little short stanza in it. The poem goes, "'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves and the mome raths outgrabe." This poem, you're probably vaguely familiar with it. You probably looked at it, laughed at it in the past. And I always thought that these were words that Lewis Carroll just said, this sounds like fun. I'm just going to make words that slide off your tongue in funny different ways. But actually, every one of these words has a meaning. They're meanings of that Lewis Carroll made up. In some cases, they're built out of different words in here. And in some cases, they're just pulled almost purely out of thin air. So when we look at a poem like this and we come across a word like brillig, we're sort of frozen. We can kind of maybe make a guess from the context of it saying it's twas. It has something to do with time, but there's not much in our stores of knowledge that can help us understand what brillig means. Same thing with most of these other words. But when you kind of go into looking at where Lewis Carroll is coming from, these words are kind of well defined. Brillig is a time, like I mentioned in here. It means 4 o'clock in the afternoon in that area. And that comes from his idea of that's about the time you put things on boil. You start boiling your dinner in here. Some of these do come into different parts. We talked about slithy toves. Well, that's apparently built out of the words slimy and live. And maybe you had a vague feeling that it was kind of lizardy, gross in here. But other words are kind of coming in completely out of nowhere. Toves, we don't understand that. Gyre, maybe we would understand a gyroscope in here. But most of these words, wabe being the grass plot around a sundial, not having that basic understanding or the skills really to pull apart words that are not root words that we're familiar with or used to thinking of as word parts. Mimsy means part mimsy, miserable, and part flimsy. So when we look at these different types of words in here and we come back to the poem and we start to see, oh, slithy, it's a slimy, lithe tove in here. It gyred like a gyroscope and it gimbled, like apparently there's a type of awl called the gimbal that spins into and makes holes in here. We can get to a little bit of information by breaking down these words if we have the skills to do that. And a lot of your students don't have those skills because they don't have that background. They're struggling finding these words and trying to really understand how to break those down and kind of work in here. So it's a fun poem. I encourage you to go and look at it in here. I've been playing with it after seeing it in the TV show All Creatures Great and Small recently. I was like, oh, I'll go ahead and memorize this. And it's been kind of fun over the last few weeks to just play with this poem. It's got a lot of places where it kind of slips off your tongue, like I mentioned. But once you start to look at what the meaning of these different words are, it takes on a little bit of a different angle. You can probably guess more or less which are the monsters, which are the creatures. But some people thought borogroves were trees. Some people thought that borogroves are different types of animals. Apparently, they're pig-like animals. There's no context within here to help you understand that information. So when I dive through here, I encourage you to kind of look those words up. It is fun, helps with kind of understanding those in there. But it is fun to play with that a few times in your head and read it, not having any idea what those words mean first. So you guys are here because I put it in the blog post, something about this being tied in with science of reading and understanding the science of vocabulary. I'm sure, like I said, you guys have heard the science of reading a whole bunch of different times. I want to kind of back up and just talk about that for half of a second because it's a confusing topic. We often talk about how do we reference the science of reading? What does that mean? And really, the science of reading is not a thing. There's no book you can pick up and say, this is my textbook on the science of reading. It is really the large body of all research that's ever been done in various fields, really understanding how people learn how to read. What you will hear is that that has been kind of distilled down into a variety of different topics in there. And there are, I think, 4 or 5 core pillars that they've built out there. There's phonemic awareness, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary study as the 4 big elements that we've seen repeated time and time again that really help students understand how to read. And that's why there's been this increased awareness that our students that are struggling, and we can see with all the different tests that are out there, that, and really just personal understanding, is that students are having a harder time reading than they have in the past in here. And so how do we go in there and teach these types of information? Some of them are more relevant at a very elementary level, phonemes, really breaking those down, understanding phonics, all that type of pieces in here. Makes sense at a very low level versus kind of at a higher level. But this includes the entire structure of reading all the way from pre-K, doing their first letter books all the way up through high school as they're kind of building up and building those things with fluency, increasing fluency, comprehension, and like I said, vocabulary study. Because vocabulary study is it's difficult maybe to draw that direct connection. It makes sense. You need to understand the vocabulary in a text. But it's hard to see how a bunch of disconnected worksheets or a book that you pull up on Monday morning and kind of blow through and then do a quiz on Friday really improve things. But there's a variety of different pieces of vocabulary study that really demonstrate a strong link between direct vocabulary instruction and reading comprehension. And I'm going to talk about direct vocabulary instruction, and I'll kind of break that down because there are a variety of different approaches, and they're all not one element in here. There are a variety of different ways that vocabulary instruction is imparted to students. We all know that there is reading a whole lot is probably your number one way to improve vocabulary. But without a direct component in there, you're going to find a disconnect because they're not going to get up to that basic level they need in order to be able to have some fluency to move through the text and then start to attack those different words. And we'll take a look at that in a couple seconds in here. But you can see in this kind of list of studies in here, these are really showing that vocabulary study is important in here in order to address reading. I got a lot of these out of a evidence-based approach essay that came out of the National Department of Education called Teaching Children to Read. If you really want to dive deep into a lot of the backbone of science of reading, it's a very large book. They have a summary of a lot of the different research that's out there. And that's kind of where a lot of these different exercises are in. It's listed down on the bottom of this post, and it's available for free from, I believe, the National Department of Education. So looking at the way we understand words, how we break that material down, there are a few kind of concepts that I think are important for us to look at and kind of break down, and in order for us to have a good conversation about this. And one of those breakdowns is kind of the tiered vocabulary words out there. There are 3 kind of basic tiers that you hear about. There's something called tier 1 words. These are your basic vocabulary. They usually say this is about 8,000 words. This is the words that you need to get around to address the universe in here and would be a kind of functional level of literacy in there. So this is a lot of the kind of old Germanic words that tell you how to about, I walk to the store, things along those lines. What we call tier 2 words are academic vocabulary. I don't really love that term academic vocabulary because it sounds like it's academic, less useful in day-to-day basis. This is really the extended vocabulary outside of those 8,000 words. Those are the words that you will encounter while you're reading the newspaper. Those are words you'll encounter reading almost any type of book in there. So it's not this kind of lofty academic vocabulary outside of it. It's really just anything beyond the basic level of functional literacy. And so when we talk about vocabulary instruction, we're really dialing down on this type of vocabulary usually. oftentimes people ask for things like tier three words. Those are really subject specific specialty words in here. Those are words that you might use in mathematics, in physics, in sciences, in history. They are valuable words in there, but they often only have kind of one specific use and have a um, are tied to understanding a topic in there. So that's really valuable, but I think it's a lot less connected to what we're doing in the English classroom. I think we need to build up the skills in those academic vocabulary that you can use to break down and pull out those subject specific words. That's where you find a lot of Latin and Greek terminology in there, and having the basic understanding of how those words work really makes a big difference when you're kind of diving into your high school physics classroom and you're starting to understand, decimeter and decameter and all the way that those things connect in here and centimeters and all the kind of different background in there can come from learning those academic vocabulary words, but it might not be something that you're specifically focused on in your English language arts classrooms. So most of what I'm talking about are these tier two vocabulary words. They are not necessarily words like peregrination that you that's a word that I learned from our vocabulary work the first time I looked into them, probably within the first week in here, and I said, I've never heard that word. So I've kind of keyed on that. I've now been here, like I said, a little bit over 25 years, or about 25 years, and I now know that I've heard that word three times in usage. So I find that kind of funny that I have this one word, peregrination. It means to kind of wander around and to walk, but it's not a frequently used word in here. But it doesn't necessarily mean just those words. It's really anything that is kind of beyond the basic understanding in here. I also want to talk about a little bit about the different types of vocabulary knowledge that's out there. We often think about, oh, do you know these words? And there are actually kind of different ways that you can understand vocabulary words. And we've all had the experience of you read a book, you go, okay, great, I understood that sentence. And then somebody asks you what that that word is in the middle of it. And you stumble and you say, well, it means kind of this, and you have trouble pulling out a formal definition of that word. You understand that it's vaguely about some topic in here. And that's really kind of the difference in here. We have something called academic knowledge. That's often what we're doing when we pull out these vocabulary words, and why it feels a little bit disconnected when you have just a list of words and you're pulling definitions out of just pure memory in here. That's a different knowledge than something called oral vocabulary, and that's ability to use that word in daily conversation. And that's something like that peregrination word. It's saying, "Oh, I'm going out for my daily peregrination after a cup of coffee." I now have that word in my oral vocabulary. Most of you probably don't. You probably never use that in here. I again don't use that, but I have the ability to use that because it's something that I've kind of keyed up on, and it is a deeper understanding of that word. And then a lot of times, what we're focused on when it comes to science of reading, and what we really want to do is really lift something that we pay a little bit less attention to. It was sometimes used to be called sight vocabulary, and that's kind of understanding the word in context when you see it in here. And I like the definition of reading vocabulary rather than sight vocabulary. Sight vocabulary is like that, oh, I've seen that word over there. Yes, I get it. In here, reading vocabulary really means that while you're reading, you understand the little extra clues of context, give you enough information from that vocabulary word. It doesn't stop you in your tracks when you're reading. I'll stick with my terrible word. You guys are going to be sick of peregrination at the end of this one. But Bill went out on his peregrination, tied up his shoes, and walked out. You may not have run into that word before, but now that I've put in a little bit of context that he tied his shoes and he walked out the front door, you now understand what that word means. It didn't freeze you up. It didn't stop you while you're reading your text, so you can continue to move forward. And that's really how some of this vocabulary can help pull you through. And that skill of understanding vocabulary using Latin and Greek roots is really core to having that reading vocabulary. That's where you go, okay, cool. I understand that this word maybe has something to do with strength because it has fort in it. So that just kind of ties in with that context in here and really helps you streamline and move through while you're reading. And it's why that root-based skills are really important. And that's where one of the oldest papers that I've really found on vocabulary, it's a paper from a gentleman named Davis, and I don't have the paper in front of me, his name, but he described vocabulary as having two distinct skills. And that's word knowledge. That's what I told you about with peregrination. That's where I have the knowledge of that word because I saw the definition somewhere in the past, and it's used to help build out that structure in here. There's also a skill that he called vocabulary and reasoning. And what that is being able to find a word in a real setting and being able to parse that word out to break it down. That involves a variety of different topics. That includes things like the Latin and Greek root skills that we're talking about, but also the context-based skills that are out there. How do we build that type of vocabulary and reasoning and make it more than just, great, you've got your 10 vocabulary words out there. And if I come across those 10 words in the next 6 months, I will totally know what it was because you taught me what syzygy means. Again, another one that you don't run into very often. That one was a high school vocabulary word of mine. So vocabulary, that science of reading, the history of what works in vocabulary is kind of ties down to a few different elements, things that really work when you're teaching vocabulary. One of those is understanding word structure. That's what we're primarily talking about. That's the Latin and Greek roots structure in here. That's also things like understanding when a word changes from an adjective to a noun. Those are kind of tied in with um, your suffixes. We use those to really get word structures, but having that basics of, okay, I understand that this word, because it has ly, is an adverb. Even if I don't understand that meaning of adverb, I know that I changed from something that I'm kind of familiar with to something that addresses a different word, whether that's a verb or something in there. So having that word structure is really important. We talk about direct or explicit instruction and indirect instruction. And notice that both of these are on here. The majority of words that you learn come from indirect instruction. That is not the vocabulary workbooks that Prestwick House sells. It's not the books that Sadler Oxford, anyone else sells out there. It's not worksheets, it's not things you do. It's that ability to find and kind of pick up on words as you're going through them. That's the majority of what you'll pick up in here. But there is a lot of research that shows that direct or explicit instruction gives you the skills and the baseline level of word knowledge to begin to have indirect instruction pick up a whole lot of different words. I think I have a paper and I don't have the one in front of me in here, so my numbers might be a little bit off, but it was something like 75%. It's 75% more effective to have indirect instruction picking up words if you are supplementing it with that direct instruction. So having that focus and saying, hey, it's important to pick up these words and giving them that background will improve your indirect instruction and your words that you pick up from reading. Semantic relationships are another one. When I was in high school, this will kind of date me. I already told you I've been here for 25 years almost, so it gives me that area anyway. But the semantic relationships are connections between different words. When I was a kid, it was analogies. We had analogies everywhere. You talked A is to B is to C. All of that backed off when we stopped focusing on those in the SAT. But we still know that synonyms, antonyms, words that have different connections, stronger words, weaker words, words that have different connotative meanings, understanding the connections between those different words helps build that backbone in here. We know that students need multiple exposure and that material has to be spaced out a little bit. If you ask your students to go do 5 different worksheets on the same day and then never look at it again, they're not going to ever encounter those words again. They're going to lose those out here. We want to go ahead and if we're exposing students to words, do it a variety of different times and give them a little bit of break between them for that to build in here. We know that learning from context is a skill. Practicing working with those is important. There are really distinct elements that you can find within context clues that are not just look around for context clues, which is what I felt like it was always taught. You can actually teach specifically, hey, look for times when there is a word. I mentioned the sentence before where I said, going out for his daily peregrination, Bill tied his shoes and went out for and walked out the front door. Well, walking, putting on his shoes, all of those are tied in with that word in here. And there are ways to help identify those words that are around here that really almost work as direct synonyms in there, because that's the way that we read and write here. We build larger contexts that have additional elements in there. And then there are kind of association methods in there. That's a lot of the different types of activities where you might draw words and really use them in different ways than just a single activity in here, matching the definition 12 different times. So how you connect those with words that you already know. So when I go ahead and kind of look at Latin and Greek roots, I mentioned earlier, they mentioned that they call English a Germanic language. Why do we always focus on Latin and Greek roots? Well, a lot of that has to do with that second tier vocabulary words we talked about. The core of English and a lot of those short little words that we use every day, those are the Germanic words in here. English has had an interesting history. There's a book, if anybody's interested in it, it's called like a biography of the English language that talks about how words over time and the language itself is not kind of a fixed thing. And English specifically really over time has adapted, grabbed different words from all over the different place. Latin roots make up about 50 to 70% of all words out there. It's kind of hard to believe that it's that much in here, but those words come in through French. Famously, the Norman invasion, when the French came in and took over England, all the aristocracy became French. That became the primary language. That's why we have words like boeuf, beef, that come from French, and we also have cow, that is the kind of poor person's. The animal is that the poor people were slaughtering was one piece, but the food became the French word, and that's beef in here. And that all comes originally primarily from the English thing. So one note on there, that is a long and winding road of adaptation. Sometimes you sit there and you're like, well, I want to teach the vocabulary word vocab root. Pick one out of random in there. Luster, which comes from lustare, means to make bright in here. Well, there might be 20 different ways that word is used between illustrious, the word luster, the word illustrative in here. All of those words come from that same root word, but they're going to be little chunks out there. So when you are introducing these words, it's best, I think, usually not to get too tied into saying, okay, the root is specifically LUST, because in some other case it may not even have all of those words in there. It may drop the R because it went from Latin to French and then became a different Spanish word before it came into English. All of that is a weird and strange way that this language works, and it's kind of the fun part of it. Greek words make up maybe 25% of all words in here. That's frequently technical words in here. A lot of what I was talking about earlier, where it's science, medicine, philosophy, they're very structured when it comes into the way that Greek came into our language in here. So a lot of the tier 3 words come from Latin and Greek roots in here. So it's good to have those put in here. You'll notice between those two, we're looking at somewhere between 75 and it says 95 in here. I think that's kind of an exaggeration of all words coming from these sources in here. But it really is a very, very large percent of our language that comes from these type of root words that we pull in here. So when we are teaching these words, I have a couple of different papers that are out there. What I really want to identify is that there is a difference between the way the skilled readers approach difficult words and this Perfetti and Hart paper from now it's about 25 years ago, really identified that those who are doing well on these tasks understand how to break down these words. They're able to focus on that. That's the same thing that we found in a paper that's a little bit more newer called morphological problem solving, that talks about the way that you kind of dive in this and really differentiates between two different categories of words that tie back to what I was talking about, both in terms of indirect and direct instruction and the kind of different ways that we process words. They talk about actually learned words and potentially knowable words. So while you're kind of breaking down these words, sometimes you're going to take the time to really dig in and go, okay, cool. I understand that word. I learned it. It now sits kind of in my brain somewhere. And this kind of potentially knowable word where you're like, oh, I vaguely understand that that word means something having to do with, um, you know, a seed in there. It has something to do with seed to give up, something like that in there. And I'm able to go through, and because of all the context clues in there, those are potentially knowable words because I have that breakdown. And having those skills gives you the knowledge to really dive into understanding and being able to read, which is really what our goal is with almost all of our vocabulary instruction. It is definitely useful to have vocabulary instruction tied with uh, for testing purposes as well and for writing in here. But when we look at vocab instruction, most of the time we're really mostly focused on how do we help our kids become better readers. So I mentioned kind of at the top of this lesson, I had a couple of different ideas for activities that you might use to help build up the awareness of this with your students. All of these are kind of quick little activities that don't require you to have any books to really work off of here. My first is what I call kind of root prefix suffix brainstorming in here. And it's really a way to let your students understand that there is a wide web of words in here. So select a word that you'd like your students to learn that is made up of a distinct prefix, a root, and suffix, but don't share that with your class yet. Identify what each of those root parts are. I put a couple of different words on the bottom here that might work, something like retrospective. Maybe your students have never heard that word, but ask them to identify a variety of different words that that have the word retro in them. They may think of retro video games. They may really just pull out here. It doesn't matter what they grab in there, but you're focused just on that retro piece of it. Then you can go ahead and look at spect, and they may think of spectacles. They may think of a variety of different, a spectacle. And you can ask them after they're done with that, what do all and then finally for IVE, think of all the different words that have IVE in there. They can see that they're different kind of categories of different elements in here. Now, ask them what all those things in that first column have in common. They might come back to you with, oh, the retro stuff is all old. That's a great activity. They're looking backwards on here. Then those spectacles and a spectacle have something to do with things that you see, IV. They'll pull it through there. Now you can pull out that vocabulary word and say, okay, what does retrospective mean? And they'll be able to pull that word apart and say, okay, cool. I've gone ahead and I now understand it's something to do with looking backwards on things. And right there, you've given them not only the ability to work with a vocabulary word in here and learn a new vocab word, but really to tie it in with all of the different stuff they already have in their knowledge and to start building that ability to structure those in there. So I think that's a really great activity for building up that awareness and kind of working in a large group on here. My next couple of activities are kind of more games in there and letting students play with them in there. My next one, I call it kind of mix and match. It's dividing your class into little groups and getting a series of prefix, suffixes, and roots on a set of index cards. Don't worry what they are. Shuffle them up, randomize them, give them out to the students, and ask them to, in groups of 5 here, give them 60 seconds, maybe a minute and a half, something along those lines, and try to figure out how many real words they can come up with and give them a point for each word that pulls from these different root words. And really what it is trying to turn this experience of working with root words into a game. I've lost the name of that. What is it? Is it Boggle, the one that you shuffle up all the different letter combinations to try to come up with a word? Here we're doing that same thing with root words in here. So it's a way to get students competing against each other, having fun, kind of scraping together and not struggling over this type of thing, but really finding different ways to interact with each other and to interact with the word parts while they move forward. And my third activity that I have to throw out to you is what I'm calling Jabberdash, rather than a copyrighted name from Mattel that's out there for a game they have, that it comes from the root words from Dutch, Balder, and another root word from Dutch, dash. So this is what I call Jabberdash after the Jabberwocky word up here. And the idea is to kind of connect the root awareness into a game like that Balderdash that I mentioned in here. So you put your groups into small groups and you share a difficult vocabulary word that has root words that are from Latin and Greek, something that you have in here. If you have one of our vocab books, you could probably look at the high levels in there and find some words that are pretty tricky for students in here. But things that you don't think the students will know right off the top of their heads in here. And their goal is to come up with a definition for that word that's plausible enough to fool their classmates. If they can come up with the exact right definition, that's fantastic. That means they're, well, doing a great job. If they get that right, they come up with the correct word, 10 points right for the group. They do well in here. If they come up with a definition that's tied in with one of those root words that you've put in here, then say anti-disestablishmentarianism, giant word we've all played with in here, and they notice that anti is in here, or they notice that establish piece is in there, and they make a definition that uses that, they get a point for using the prefix or suffix correctly, or for using the root word in there. And then let your kids vote on it. It's a great opportunity to have them, kids love the voting materials out there. Figure out if you get a point if you guess the correct definition in there, or if your question tricks other people into it. And building that game activity in there really should help your students begin to pay a little bit more attention and have fun with these words in here, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get away from this historical background of us saying, hey, our vocabulary activities are boring things that you just stare at and get through as quickly as possible. We really want to try to encourage people. So that's really what we do with our different, vocabulary programs, is try to make them as interesting as possible for students. So we have two different Latin and Greek roots oriented programs out there. If you're interested at the end of this webinar, like I said, I'm going to reach out to everybody who is here or those that attend virtually and offer free samples on them. If it seems like something that you might want to try out in your classroom, might want to look at, I'm happy to send those vocabulary books right out to you. They're some of my favorite programs working in the classroom. And the first one is called Vocabulary from Latin and Greek Roots. Very surprising name in here. Kind of tells you exactly what you do in here. It's a program for grades 7 through 12. And it is that direct instruction that we talked about. It focuses on root words, giving people that organized instruction. We have a wide variety of materials to help support that for that repeated spaced practice that we've talked about in here, whether it's posters you can share up on your classroom, PowerPoints, presentations, quizzes, tests, different types of tests, online free games that you can work through. We have all of that material for this program so that it can get your students that basic understanding of Latin and Greek roots that will help them build their skills in here. And I'm scrolling the wrong way again, pardon me. The book is built around about 200 vocabulary words per lesson. We have fun mnemonic cartoons to help build out here, interesting word notes. Each book is a little bit different in terms of the total number of grade level of vocab words that we have in here, and roots, because roots are a little bit different than a traditional, we can just write down 10 vocab words in here. So it does flex a little bit depending on how many good vocabulary words in here. And we really focus on context-based activities all the way through this book. So our goal is to give students familiarity with these words, be able to find these root words as they go through here, and kind of build skills for a lifetime. For those in a little bit lower grade levels, we have a program called Growing Your Vocabulary. This is a 4th through 6th grade program that really dovetails in with our high school program. It's got a little bit of a different approach in here. It ties in with this fact that students are maybe a little bit more curious rather than directed into trying to get their materials done. So we try to spend a lot of time introducing these words, tying them with their favorite subject areas, math, science, history. We have a variety of different cartoons associated with this programs. We actively focus on teaching the vocabulary roots, the suffixes, the words to learn in here, as well as, like I said, here, this is a lesson on growing. So we have words like flourish in here, florist. But we also, I believe, have some words like dendrite, which tie in with science in here, that are all in the different families that we have in here. We've illustrated this. We really try to have fun with your kids and tie them into different areas in here. And more than any other vocabulary program out there, we have a lot of activities. We try to really reach students where they are, whether it's working with crossword with like word search type activities or crossword puzzles, or working with context things. There's a wide variety of kind of fun activities all the way throughout this book. So that's kind of the introduction to what Prestwick House items are. Like I said, I'd really love to get samples out to everyone. But if you're not interested in there yet and you want to learn a little bit more about Prestwick House, I did want to just share with you guys, we do have a variety of free resources out there. Our top vocabulary programs, Vocabulary Root, Power Plus, Vocabulary from Latin and Greek roots and growing your vocabulary. We have free Quizlet-based games available on these web pages at vocabroots.com and vocabularypowerplus.com. Those are available for anybody to go out there and practice using our words. It really helps give you that spaced practice in here. So we have those available on their own web pages. Our free library, which you guys may be familiar with, we release at least usually once a month a new free resource. We've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them up now. We have a book on teaching vocabulary, kind of pulls in all of our different vocabulary programs. So if you are somebody who maybe you're less sold on using Latin and Greek roots with your group and you really want to focus on a context-based approach, we have information on our vocab and context series within those, our Power Plus series, which is kind of our big flagship that ticks off all the different boxes, has all these types of information in here. So you can learn a little bit more about those top programs in there, as well as crossword puzzles based on our program. We have posters available. You can download, print them. There's no gating in there. You can just go ahead and put them up on your classroom. You want to have a Latin and Greek roots poster on there. We have at least 3 or 4 of them available right now, as well as plenty for literature out there. So I encourage you to go ahead and check out those resources. They're available on our webpage. And we also have some free vocabulary lesson plans out there. Some on understanding connotation, denotation, and a variety of different, I think there's some dictionary skills out there. So we have a whole section on those lesson plans, as well as other top subject areas. And our blog is full of great information. We have new material coming out all the time. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get notifications when we have new materials coming out. So I just pulled out a couple of our kind of more recent materials on similar topics that I was able to pull through here. So I really want to thank everybody for taking some time to sit down with me on this Thursday early afternoon. Hopefully, I was able to provide some valuable information for you guys. Oops. Well, just went out of here. But if you have any questions, I'm all on the wrong screen here. I'll pop back over to this here. My email address is Keith@Prestwick House. Like I said, we'll be following up with an email in here shortly that'll have maybe a copy of this slideshow, as well as information about getting a free sample of the books that we've talked about in here. But if there's any questions that pop up in chat, I'd love to be able to answer them for you. I believe I was able to turn that back on, but if you weren't able to access the chat, feel free to email me at any point in time. I'd really love to hear from you. So thank you guys for your time. I'll hang out for a couple of minutes and I'll stop the recording now. Okay. Well, thank you, Mandy. It's been good talking to you briefly, even though I don't get a chance to hear from your end here. I appreciate your time and hopefully you found some interesting materials in here.